The knock came past midnight. 3 soft strikes a strong wind would have swallowed, and I knew before I lifted the bar that it was not the wind. A man who has lived 15 years alone on a mountain learns the difference between a branch against the door and a human hand. I set the lamp on the table. I did not reach for the gun, because I had promised a dead man I never would again, and I had kept that promise so long that the corner where the gun lay had gone soft with dust and grown over in my mind like a grave with grass. I opened the door to wind, and a woman. She stood with one arm braced on the jamb and the other holding a child against her hip, and the cold had her so hard she could not at first make her mouth form a word. Her lip was split. There was a bruise coming up under her eye the color of a thundercloud, and her shawl had frozen stiff at the edges where her breath had wet it. The boy against her had his face turned into her neck and his small fists knotted in her collar. Behind them the night fell away down the slope toward Calvert's Bend, and far below, where the valley narrowed, I could see 3 points of orange light moving along the river road. Torches. Slow ones. Men who were not in a hurry because they did not think the thing they hunted could get far. "I'm sorry," she said at last. The words came out broken into pieces by her shivering. "I saw your smoke. I didn't have anywhere." She stopped. She looked at me the way a person looks at the last plank of a bridge that is already burning. "I can pay. I don't have money, but I can work. I can cook, I can mend, I can break a horse if you've got one wild. Just not tonight. Tonight I just need a wall." I had not heard another voice in my own dooryard in longer than I cared to count. I stood there a moment with the wind taking the warmth out of the room behind me, and I looked past her again at those 3 lights crawling up the river, and something in me that I had thought was dead turned over in its sleep. "Get in by the fire," I said, "both of you." She came in like a woman stepping into church, careful, like the floor might be holy or might give way. I shut the door and dropped the bar. The boy lifted his head off her shoulder just long enough to take the measure of me, and I will tell you, there is no judge in any courtroom as honest as a frightened child's first look. He decided I was not a thing to run from, and he put his face back down, and that small surrender did more to me than I would have admitted then. "There's stew on the hook," I said. "It's 2 days old, but it's hot. Sit, I'll see to your horse." "I don't have a horse," she said. "We walked." I stopped with my hand on the latch. From the bottom of the river road to my door is the better part of a day's ride. On foot, in the cold, with a child, I did not finish the thought. "Then sit closer," I said, and I went out into the dark to look at the torches one more time and to think. I should tell you who I was, so you understand what those torches asked of me, and why the asking was so hard. For 11 years I wore the Marshal star in Calvert's Bend, back when the Bend was a rougher place than it is now, when the cattle money came through wild, and the men who chased it came wilder. I was good at it. I will not pretend otherwise out of false humility. A man who is bad at keeping the peace in a town like that does not last 11 years. He lasts 11 months and then they bury him. I was quick and I was fair, and I had a way of talking a thing down before it had to be settled with lead. And I was proud of that. And pride, the preachers will tell you, is the long fuse on every disaster a man ever walks into. There came a night when 2 brothers, drunk and mean, took to shooting out the windows of the mercantile, and I went to stop them, and one of them turned his pistol toward the boardwalk where folks were scattering, and I drew and I fired to put him down before he could fire into the crowd. I was fast. I was right to draw. Every man in that street told me after that I was right to draw. But the bullet I sent went through the meat of his arm and on past him, and there was a boy behind him I never saw, a boy of 9 who had run out from his mother's skirts to see the excitement the way boys do, and my bullet found him, and he died on the boards before his mother reached him. His name was Samuel. I knew his father. I had bounced that child on my knee at a church social not 3 months before. There is no telling you what that does to a man. I gave the star back the next morning. The town did not ask me to. Half of them came to my door and told me it was not my fault, that the brother had forced it, that any man in my place would have done the same, and they were not wrong and it did not matter. I had aimed and I had fired and a child was in the ground. I took the gun off my hip, the heavy old Colt I'd carried 11 years, and I rode up into the high country to stretch a valley nobody wanted because it was too far and too cold and too steep for cattle. And I built a cabin, and I broke horses for the ranches down below and got paid in coin and trade. And I put the Colt in the bottom of a trunk wrapped in an oilcloth, and I swore on Samuel's small grave that I would never lift it against another living soul as long as I drew breath. 15 years. I had kept that oath 15 years. And now there were 3 torches coming up my mountain after a woman with a split lip, and I stood in my own cold dooryard and felt the weight of the trunk in the corner of the cabin behind me as if it had its own pull, like a stone at the bottom of a well calling up to the man leaning over the edge. I went back inside. She had not touched the stew. She had set the boy on the bench close by the fire and pulled the bench nearer still, and she sat with her own back to the cold of the room and her body between the boy and the door, and she had a kitchen knife of mine off the table laid across her knee, half hidden in the folds of her skirt. She thought I had not seen it. I had. I did not begrudge her one bit. A woman who has been hunted does not stop watching the door just because a stranger has been kind for 10 minutes. And a woman who stops watching the door is a woman who has not yet been hunted hard enough to learn. Eat, I said. You'll think clearer fed. He should eat first, she said, and she meant the boy. There's enough for the regiment. Eat. She fed the boy first anyway, spooning it into him while he leaned half asleep against her arm, and only when he had gone slack and warm and his eyes had closed for good did she eat herself, fast and quiet, the way a person eats who has learned that food is a thing that can be taken away mid-bite. I sat across the fire and let her be. When she had finished, she set the bowl down and squared her shoulders and looked at me, and I saw she had decided to tell me the truth, which is a braver thing than most people credit. My name is Della Hartwell, she said. This is Toby. My husband was Asa Hartwell. He's been dead 11 months. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was not a kind man, but he was not the worst of them, and he's not the trouble. She drew a breath. Asa had 3 brothers, the Vances. Their mother married twice, so they go by Vance, and Asa took his father's name. When Asa died, the land came to me. Our quarter section down on Sweetwater Flat, and the water rights that run with it, which is the whole of why they want it, because the Vances' graze dries up by August and ours doesn't. She said it plainly, like a woman reading a ledger. They told me a woman alone can't hold land. They told me to sign it over and they'd see I was looked after. Her mouth twisted on the word. I knew what looking after meant, so I said no. And tonight Brock, the eldest, came to the house to make me sign, and when I wouldn't he raised his hand to me, and Toby came at him with a fire iron, just a little boy with a fire iron, and Brock, her voice caught for the first time. She mastered it. Brock backhanded him into the wall, and I knew then. I knew if I stayed they'd have the land and they'd have us, and one day I'd cross one of them wrong and Toby would be in the way and I'd lose him. So I took the boy and I took the deed and I went out the back into the dark and we walked, and I saw your smoke against the moon, and here I am in a stranger's house with his knife on my knee asking for a wall. She fell silent. The fire popped. Down the mountain, faint through the chinking, I thought I heard a man's voice carry up on the wind, a single shout, the sound men make to each other when they are casting about for a trail in the dark. They'll lose the track at the rockfall, I said. It's frozen up there. No boot prints in frozen scree. They'll have to wait for light to cut for sign, and by light I'll have thought of something. You don't have to think of anything, she said. Come morning I'll go. I won't bring this to your door. I only needed. You needed a wall, I said. You've got one. Sleep, both of you. There's the bed in the back. It's mine, but I don't use it half the nights anyhow. I sleep in the chair. That was a lie. I slept in the bed like any man, but I was not going to make a woman with a split-lip bed down on my floor. Knife stays where it is if it eases you. It won't offend me. She looked at me a long moment, and whatever she had been braced to find in me, she did not find it, and I watched something in her shoulders come down a half-inch. Just a half-inch, the smallest easing, and it was as if I had set down a load I did not know I'd picked up. "Why," she said, "you don't know me. I've brought 4 armed men up your mountain. Most men would put me back out the door and bar it." I thought about Samuel. I thought about the trunk in the corner. I thought about 15 years of a quiet I had mistaken for peace. "Because once," I said, "I didn't stand between somebody and the harm coming for them when I had it in my power to, and I have been paying for it every day since. Go to sleep, Mrs. Hartwell." She went. The boy never woke. I sat up in the chair by the fire with my old hound at my feet and my eyes on the barred door, and I did not sleep at all, and somewhere toward the gray end of the night I got up quiet and went to the trunk in the corner and lifted the lid and looked down at the oilcloth bundle lying there like a thing asleep, and I did not touch it, but I did not shut the lid all the way either. Morning came hard and bright, the way it does at that height, the snow on the peaks gone pink and then white and the valley below filling up with a blue cold shadow that the sun would not reach till near noon. I had coffee on when the boy woke. He came out of the back room rubbing his eyes, saw me, froze, and then his belly betrayed him with a growl loud enough to hear across the room, and I laughed before I could stop myself, the first laugh out of me and I could not tell you how long, and it came out rusty as a gate. "Sit down," I said. "Can you eat eggs?" He nodded, wary, and slid onto the bench. He was a sturdy little fellow under the fright, maybe 7 years old, with his mother's straight look and a cowlick that stood up off his crown no matter what. I cracked eggs into the skillet. He watched my hands. "You got horses," he said, first words out of him. "6 down in the lower pen, 2 of 'em wild yet." "Can I see?" "After your mother says, and after you eat." He ate like he was filling a hole that went down to his boots. Della came out while he was still at it, and she had washed her face at the basin and pinned up her hair, and in the daylight without the fright and the cold on her, I saw she was younger than I'd thought, and that under the bruise she had a face a man would not soon forget, though I told myself sternly that this was no kind of thing to be noticing. A hunted widow at my table, and I poured her coffee and said nothing of it. "They didn't come in the night," she said. "It was half a question." "No, they're down at the rockfall, or were. I went out at first light and looked. 3 of them at the bottom of the scree, sitting their horses, and a 4th riding back down toward the bend." I set the coffee in front of her. "That'll be one of them gone for the law, I expect, to swear out that you stole the deed and ran off with another man's property." Her face went still. "They'd do that, they'd make me the thief." "They would. It's the smart play. Get the sheriff on their side and then they don't have to do the dirty part themselves." I sat. "Drink your coffee. There's time. The sheriff in Calvert's Bend is a man named Harlan Pryor, and Harlan is not a bad man, but he is a careful one, and a careful man with 3 Vances swearing one way and a strange woman swearing the other is going to take the easy road and side with the men who will still be here next election. Unless—" I stopped. "Unless what?" "Unless somebody whose word still counts in that town stands up next to you," I said, and I did not say the rest, which was that I did not know whether my word still counted for anything down there, after 15 years on a mountain, after the thing with Samuel, after walking away from the star. I did not know if there was a man left in Calvert's Bend who would take Eli Calder's say-so over Vance's. I had spent 15 years making very sure I would never have to find out. "You were somebody," she said. She was watching me close now, the careful watching of a woman who has learned to read men the way a sailor reads the sky because her life depends on it. "Down in the bend. You were somebody once." "Once," I said. "Eat your eggs." I will not pretend the next 4 days were anything but strange to me, and I will not pretend they were anything but good. The Vances did not come up. They could not without a fight, because there is exactly one trail up into Larkspur Hollow that a horse can take, and it runs along a shelf of rock for a 1/4 mile with a drop on one side and a wall on the other, and one man with a long gun and a clear head can hold that shelf against 10. And they knew it, because Brock Vance rode up to the bottom of it the first morning and sat his horse there looking up at my cabin a long while, and I stood out on my porch where he could see me, empty-handed. And let him look, and after a time he turned his horse and rode back down. He was waiting for the law. He was a patient kind of cruel Brock, the kind that would rather win clean and keep his hands looking clean while he did it. So we had 4 days. And in those 4 days, a thing happened in my cabin that I had stopped believing could happen anywhere near me. It got warm, not the fire, the people. Della was not a woman to sit and be saved. By the second morning, she had taken stock of my whole place with one walk round, and started setting it to rights, not out of any wish to please me, but because she could not abide a thing left half done, and my place had been half done in 100 ways for 15 years. She found my hens half wild and not laying, and within 2 days had them laying. She found the rip in my coat I'd been meaning to mend since the spring before last, and mended it without asking, and handed it back without a word. She could indeed break a horse. I watched her work the gentler of my 2 green colts in the lower pen with a patience that was almost frightening, never raising her voice, never raising her hand, just being there steady, until the colt decided on its own that she was not a thing to fear, and I stood at the rail and watched and thought about how a frightened creature comes to trust, and how it is never by force. And I am not too proud to tell you I learned something at that rail from a woman half my acquaintance. And the boy was my undoing, if you want the plain truth of it. Toby took to me the way a burr takes to a wool sock. He followed me to the pens and the woodpile and the spring, and asked me the name of every tool and every horse and every bird that crossed the sky. And when he did not know a word, he made one up, and he laughed at his own made-up words. And somewhere in the middle of the 3rd day, I realized I had been smiling for an hour at a stretch, and my face ached from it like a muscle that's been favored too long and is finally being used. He found the trunk in the corner the 3rd evening. Boys find everything. And he had the lid up before I crossed the room, and he was looking down at the oilcloth bundle with his head cocked. "What's this one?" "Leave that be," I said, sharper than I meant to, and he flinched, and I was sorry the instant I'd done it, because a flinch from that boy meant somebody had taught him to flinch, and I knew exactly who. I knelt down by him and gentled my voice. "It's a gun, son. It's mine. It's an old one and I don't use it, and I'd as soon you didn't touch it, that's all. Not because you've done wrong, just because guns aren't toys and you're worth too much to lose to one. All right." He looked at me with those straight eyes. "Did you ever shoot somebody?" The room went quiet. Della had stopped at the stove. The fire ticked. "Yes," I said. "I would not lie to that boy. A long time ago, and I have been sorry every day since, which is why it stays in the trunk." I closed the lid gently this time, and I did not shut the latch, and Toby, satisfied in the way of children who get a straight answer, went off to torment the hound, and I stayed kneeling by the trunk a moment longer than I needed to. When I rose, Della was looking at me across the room, and there was something new in her face. Not pity. I cannot abide pity, and she had the sense to know it. It was more like recognition. One person who carries a stone seeing the stone another person carries, and nodding, just once in the way that says, "I know, I carry mine too, and I won't ask you to set it down before you're able." That night after the boy was asleep, she came and sat by the fire across from me, and for a long while neither of us spoke. Then she said, quiet, "The man you shot, was it fair?" "It was a child," I said. The words came easier than they ever had, which surprised me. "Not the man I aimed at. A boy ran into the street and my bullet went on past the man and found him. He was 9. His name was Samuel." She did not say it wasn't my fault. She did not say any of the things the town had said. She let the fire pop a few times, and then she said, "And you've been up this mountain ever since, keeping that gun in a trunk so it can never do that again." "Yes. And if Brock Vance comes up that trail," she said, "and the only thing standing between him and my boy is that gun in that trunk, what then?" Eli called her. I had no answer for her. We both knew I had no answer. We sat with the not having of it, and the fire burned down, and after a while she rose and touched my shoulder once lightly, The first time she had touched me at all and went to bed, and the place where her hand had been stayed warm a long time after she was gone. The law came on the 5th day, and it came in the shape of Harlan Pryor. I knew it was Harlan by the way he sat his horse, slow and square, before I could make out his face, and I knew it was bad by the fact that the 3 Vances rode up the trail behind him, strung out single file on the shelf, because that meant Harlan had decided which way the wind blew and had let the Vances tag along to watch their property recovered. I told Della to take the boy into the back room and bar it, and to my surprise she did not argue. She had the sense to know when a fight needed to be had in the open by one person and not turned into a scramble. But before she went she stopped at the trunk in the corner, and she lifted the lid, and she took out the oilcloth bundle, and she carried it across the room and set it on the table in front of me, and she looked at me. "I'm not going to touch it," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to touch it. I'm asking you to have it close enough that you can choose. That's all. The choosing is yours, but don't let them make it for you by leaving it in the trunk." And she took the boy and barred the door. I went out onto the porch with the bundle in my hand, still wrapped, and I stood there as Harlan Pryor rode into my dooryard with 3 Vances at his back. Harlan had gone gray since I'd last seen him, and heavier, but he had the same tired, honest face, and when he saw me his eyes widened a little because I do not think he had known until that moment whose cabin this was. "Eli," he said. "Eli Calder, Lord, I'd heard a man was up here breaking horses, but I never thought—" He stopped. He looked at the bundle in my hand, recognized the shape of it through the oilcloth the way an old lawman will, and his face changed. "Eli, what's this now?" "This is my house, Harlan," I said. "What's your business at it?" Brock Vance kneed his horse forward before Harlan could answer. He was a big man, Brock, broad through the chest and going to fat, with a soft, cruel mouth and small eyes, and a fresh scar on his cheek I'd have bet $1 a fire iron put there. "Our business," he said, "is that you've got a thief in there. My brother's widow run off with a deed that belongs to the family and a thing or two else besides, and we tracked her here, and we'll have her and the paper and be off your mountain, and you can go back to your horses, old man, and we'll all forget you stuck your nose in." "That right, Harlan," I said. I kept my eyes on the sheriff. "These 3 swear she stole, and you ride up here to fetch her down on their word." Harlan shifted in his saddle. "There's a deed in question, Eli, and a man's widow gone in the night with his property. I'm not saying she's a thief, I'm saying there's a question, and the place to answer a question like that is down in the bend before a judge, not up here at the end of a gun." He nodded at the bundle. "Put that away. Let her come down peaceful and I'll see she gets a fair hearing, I give you my word." "Your word's good, Harlan, I never doubted it." I looked at the 3 Vances. "But you can't give me their word too, and the minute she's down off this mountain and out of your sight, your word doesn't reach her anymore. You know it doesn't, you know what these 3 are." I let that sit. "The deed's hers, Harlan. It came to her clean when her husband died. There's no question of law in it, only a question of 3 men who want her water and figured a woman alone couldn't hold it. That's not a thief you've ridden up here to fetch. That's a robbery you've agreed to escort." Harlan's jaw worked. He was a careful man like I'd told her, and I watched the care fight with the honesty in him, and I did not know which would win, and Brock Vance, who was not careful but was cunning, saw the fight too and moved to end it. "You believe a runaway woman or 3 landowners and a deed," Brock said to Harlan. "You want to ride home and tell the bend you took a horsebreaker's word over the law, over a gun in his hand." He swung down off his horse, slow, and the other 2 Vances swung down behind him, and they spread out across my dooryard in a way I had seen men spread out 100 times in 11 years of wearing the star, the slow, easy fanning of men who mean to make a thing happen and want room to make it in. "We'll just go in and get her ourselves, Sheriff, and you needn't dirty your hands. Stand aside, old man." He came toward the porch. "And here is the thing I have to tell you true, because it is the heart of the whole matter, and I will not dress it up. For 15 years I had believed that the gun was the sin. I had believed that if I never lifted it again, I would be clean, and that the keeping of my oath was the keeping of my soul, and I had built my whole life up on that mountain around the not doing of one thing. And in the moment Brock Vance set his boot on the bottom step of my porch with murder loose in his small eyes and a barred door behind me with a woman and a boy behind it, I understood all at once and entirely that I had had it backward the whole time. The gun was never the sin. Samuel did not die because I lifted a gun. Samuel died because of 100 things: the brother's drink, the crowd, the angle, the sorry chance of the world. And my lifting the gun had been the right thing done with a wrong result, which is the oldest grief there is and the one no oath can fix. The sin I had been most afraid of was a thing I had never even done. And the real sin, the one I had been walking toward for 15 years without seeing it, would be to stand on this porch with the power to protect a child and choose instead to keep my hands clean. I had told Della, once I didn't stand between somebody and the harm coming for them. That was a lie. The truth was I had stood, and a child had died anyway, and I had spent 15 years deciding that meant I must never stand again. And here was the harm, come up my own mountain, and a boy behind a door who had hit a grown man with a fire iron to keep his mother safe. I let the oilcloth fall. The old Colt came up in my hand, and it was as familiar as my own name, and I leveled it at Brock Vance's chest, and I did not shake. "Enough," I said. The whole dooryard went still. Brock froze with his boot on the step. The two brothers' hands hovered. Harlan Pryor sat his horse very straight and very quiet, and I saw him take in the way I held it, not wild, not scared, but the old Marshal's hold, the hold of a man who has done this and knows exactly what it costs. And I watched the recognition land on him, and the care go out of his face, and something older and better come into it. "I held the law in that town for 11 years, Harlan," I said, and I did not take my eyes off Brock. "You rode beside me half of them. You know my word, so here it is. This woman did not steal. That deed is hers. These men came up my mountain to take her land and take her, and they got you to carry the lantern for them, and you didn't know better, and now you do. I'm not going to shoot anybody. I gave that up. But I will stand on this porch all day and all night, and the first man who lays a hand on that door goes down, and I will answer for it to any judge in the territory and sleep sound. Now you're the law, so be it. Do your job." For a long moment nobody moved. Brock's eyes flicked from me to Harlan and back, calculating, and I watched him decide whether an old man would really fire, and I watched him fail to find the answer he wanted in my face. Because the answer was not there. I truly did not know, even then, whether I would fire or only stand. But he could not tell that, and a man like Brock cannot abide what he cannot read. Then Harlan Pryor said, in the flat, tired voice of a man who has just decided to be honest at the worst possible moment, which is the only moment honesty is worth anything, "Brock, back away from the porch." "Sheriff, back away from the porch, or I'll arrest the three of you for trespass and threat, and we'll let the judge sort the deed." Harlan's hand had come to rest, easy and plain, on his own gun. Eli Calder is the straightest man I ever wore a star beside, and he just told me a thing I had a bad feeling about the whole ride up, and I was a coward not to say so before he had to put iron in his hand to make me listen. The widow gets her hearing. In the open. With me standing by her, and Eli too if he'll come down off this rock, and if there's been a hand raised to her or that boy. His eyes went to the scar on Brock's cheek, and the fatting bruise I'd have bet matched it on Della's face. Then we'll be having a different conversation altogether, and you won't care for it. Now mount up. You learn things about men in a moment like that. Brock Vance, who had backhanded a child into a wall and raised his hand to a woman, did not have 1 ounce of fight in him the second the odds turned square. He went the color of tallow, and he mounted up, and the brothers mounted behind him, and they filed back down the shelf trail with Harlan riding rear so they could not turn, and I stood on my porch with the old Colt hanging now at my side, the weight of it strange and right, and I watched them go. And I did not fire, and I did not need to, and somewhere down inside me a 15-year-old not let go all at once, and I had to put a hand on the porch post. The door unbarred behind me. I did not turn for a moment because I did not want her to see what was on my face. Then small arms came around my leg, Toby, barreling out, fearless again the instant the danger had passed, the way children are. And behind him Della came to the doorway and stopped, and she looked at the gun in my hand, and then she looked at me, and she did not say anything about the gun at all. "You stood on the porch," she said. "I did. With it." With it? I looked down at the thing in my hand, the oilcloth lying in the dirt below the steps, the dust of 15 years still in the trunk inside. I always thought picking it up again was the thing I couldn't survive. Turns out the thing I couldn't survive was setting it down forever and calling that goodness. I looked at her. There's a difference between a man who will never raise his hand and a man who will only raise it to stand in front of somebody. I lost the difference for 15 years. "You handed it back to me on a kitchen table." She came down the steps. She took the Colt out of my hand, gently, the way she gentled the Colt at the rail, and she walked it back inside and laid it on the table, not in the trunk, on the table, where a thing lives that a man might need but hopes he won't. And that, I think, was the moment I knew, though I would not have had the words for it then. A gun in a trunk is a thing you're ashamed of. A gun on the table by the door is a thing you've made peace with. She knew the difference, too. She had probably known it all her life. We went down off the mountain together the next morning, the three of us, Della on the gentle Colt she'd broke, and the boy up in front of me on my old gray and Della's deed, folded in my breast pocket next to a thing I had not owned in 15 years, which was a reason to go back into the world. The hearing was a short business in the end. Harlan stood by her, and I stood by her, and when the judge, a dry old article named Forsythe who'd known me in my star-wearing days, saw Eli Calder walk into a Calvert's Bend courtroom for the first time in 15 years to swear to a widow's good name, you could have heard the whole town's neck crane. The deed was hers. There had never been a real question. The Vance's lawyer made noise about a family understanding, and Forsythe asked him to produce one in writing, and he could not, and that was the whole of it. As for the hand raised to her and the boy, Harlan was as good as his word. There was a separate reckoning for Brock Vance, and it was not in a courtroom's interest to be gentle about a man who hits children. And Brock learned that the careful kind of cruel does not protect you once the careful man you've been hiding behind decides to stop being careful. He served a stretch in the territorial jail, and his brothers found that the Sweetwater water rights were a great deal less appealing without their big brother to do the hard part, and they sold up and drifted off, and the valley was quieter for it. And Della Hartwell kept her land. She did not have to do what she did next, and I want that understood, because everything about her dignity rested on it being her choice and no one else's. She had the deed. She had the water. She had her freedom and her boy and a clear road in any direction she pleased, and there was not a soul in the territory could make her do otherwise. She could have set up on Sweetwater Flat and run it herself. She was capable of it, more capable than half the men who'd have offered to do it for her. I told her so, plainly, the evening before she was to go down and take up her own place, because I would not have her think the mountain was the only wall on offer. I told her the trail up to Larkspur Hollow would always be open to her and the boy, for a night or a season or as long as she liked, with no price on it and no thing owed and no question asked, and that whatever she chose I'd count myself the better for having known her. And then I shut my mouth, because a man who has just handed a woman her whole free choice has no business crowding her elbow while she makes it. She was quiet a long while. Then she said, "You'd take us up there with no claim on us, no strings, you just give us the wall." "Yes. Same as the first night. Same as the first night." "Eli Calder," she said, "I have spent my whole life being given things with strings on them and being told that was love. A man who hands me a thing with no string on it at all." She stopped. Her eyes were bright. "I'd like to make a home with you, not because I haven't got anywhere else to go. I've got Sweetwater. I'd like to make it because I choose to, with my eyes open, knowing exactly the man you are and the gun on your table and the boy in the ground you carry, and choosing all of it. If you'll have me on those terms, the choosing kind. The choosing kind, I said, is the only kind I want. We were married in the little white church in Calvert's Bend 3 Sundays after, by the same preacher who had buried Samuel, and when the vows were done, that preacher took my hand in both of his and said low, just for me, "He'd be glad, Eli, the boy, he'd be glad you came back down." And I could not speak, so I just gripped his hand, and that was answer enough between two men who'd carried the same grief a long way. I am an old man now, telling you this by the fire in the cabin at Larkspur Hollow, which is not the half-done place it was. Della saw to that the first year. We ran her Sweetwater flat and my mountain together, the water and the high grays making between them a thing neither could be alone, and we did well, and we did not get rich, and we did not care to. Toby grew up tall and straight and is breaking horses on Sweetwater now with 2 boys of his own who climb my knee the way he climbed it. And there is a grave on the hill behind the cabin with Della's name on it, these 2 winters past, and I tend it every morning, and I am not bitter about it, because a man who has had 30 years he never thought he'd be allowed has no business at all being bitter about their ending. The Colt is still on the table by the door. I never fired it, not in all those years, not once. I did not have to. It sat there as a thing made peace with, a reminder that the keeping of a home is not the same as the keeping of a coward's clean hands, and that the worst thing a strong man can do is decide his strength is too dangerous to ever spend, and so spend it on nothing, and let the harm of the world walk past him to the weak while he congratulates himself on the cleanliness of his idle hands. A woman came up my mountain in the cold one midnight with a split lip and a child against her hip, asking only for a wall, and I gave her one. And in the giving she gave me back 15 years I'd thrown into a trunk, and a son, and a wife, and the plain hard grace of standing on a porch between the people you love and the harm that comes for them, and saying, with whatever you've got in your hand or whatever you've got left in you, the one word that is the beginning of every home worth the building. Enough.